Okay, there is so much going on today with Israel moving into Gaza City, rescuing hostages, preparing for a big land war. Are we going to be pulled into a hot war? I have with me today former special agent of the FBI, Tracy Walder. She was also a CIA operative. Tracy, thank you so much for being on today's show.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So, question, as somebody with an intelligence background, do you think the United States is heading for a hot war in the Middle East? We've seen this attack on Israel. The United States and Qatar have joined forces to refreeze the $6 billion to Iran. Iran's Hezbollah announced today that they will stand with Hamas no matter what, and that they would love to see the death of Israel. What are your thoughts on this?
So it's a tough question to answer, obviously, in just sort of a short little bit. I don't believe that we are going to be fully pulled into a hot war in the same way that we want to look at, say, the invasion of Afghanistan in, October of 2001, simply because Israel is not a failed or fragile state like Afghanistan was. And so I think if we are pulled in, it's going to look very different than what a war in Afghanistan or Iraq looks like, if that makes any sense. I think obviously we have our aircraft strike group, out there, and we are clearly bringing in, supplies, weapons, and kind of a show of force in that way. I also think we are probably working with other countries as well to ensure that Israel has, the support that they need. But I don't think we're going to see sort of this full scale invasion, if that's what we want to call it, like we saw with Operation Enduring Freedom. I think it's going to look different than that.
Okay, so Israel is on a stronger foundation on her own, but may need support and some intervention if called upon. But it's not going to be a full out invasion unless something major comes that you and I can't see. Could you help my audience understand? Just because I know that you dealt with this, what is the major difference between Hezbollah and Hamas? Because
Oh,
they're now kind of talking as if they're in the same brotherhood or the same gang, but maybe help my viewers understand that.
sure. And I made a TikTok kind of breaking that down as well, because I think it's hard for people to understand. There's so many different terrorist groups. So the first thing that I want to kind of say about both of them in terms of similarities is Hamas and Hezbollah were both placed on the US terrorist watch list back in 1997. And they've been on there ever since. You can go to the State Department and you can see that. So I am going to refer to both Hamas and Hezbollah's terrorist groups because that's what we've designated them as. So Hamas is really an extension of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, if you will, and they are primarily Sunni Muslims. And basically, what happened is back in 2006 ish, Israel sort of gave up Gaza, if you will, to the Palestinians. And the Palestinians held elections, but I sort of use that in air quotes, to elect a group. And Hamas is the group that was elected to govern Gaza, whereas you have what's called the PLO up in the West Bank, which operates more like a nation state, if you will. And so Hamas has been basically this governing body of Gaza since 2006-ish, give or take a year. They are typically extremely violent. They are, for a while, they were having trouble getting funds, but since 2017, Iran actually stepped in and started primarily funding them. And it was really at that point that Israel said, hey, we're going to go ahead and put a blockade around this part of Gaza because we don't want weapons getting in and out. That's been a source of contention as well. So their leader is Yahya Sinwar. He is their current sort of chief, I guess. He is also on our terrorist list. And their charter calls for the destruction of Israel and Jews. They are not for a two-state solution, period, the end. That's what their charter calls for. Hezbollah is a little bit different. Their head, Nasrallah, is also on our terrorist watch list. They are Shiite Muslims. And so they have been funded a lot of the time by Iran, and they came out of a civil war basically in Lebanon in the 80s, right around the same time as Hamas. The difference with them is they actually hold seats, legitimate seats in the Lebanese parliament, and have really engaged in attacks worldwide, not just in the northern part of Israel. So they've bombed Jewish embassies in Buenos Aires. They've bombed our embassy, in Beirut, killing 63 service members. So they have a little bit more of a worldwide reach, I guess, if you will, than Hamas does. I'm sorry for the long answer, and I hope that's okay.
No, that's good. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to wrap my head around this, because Israel is attacked and large groups of Americans are suddenly saying, "Free Palestine, we stand with Palestine." And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Israel was attacked. Why is Palestine getting all this support? So I've been trying to figure out, like what is the disconnect that I'm missing? And these are kind of some of the puzzle pieces I've put together, and maybe you can help fill in the gap. But basically, Hamas is almost like a mafia.
Mm-hmm.
And there's about 30,000 of them, and they are holding the other 2 million Palestinians hostage. So anytime Palestine tries to get ahead, renegotiate with Israel, open the border, allow jobs to come in, Hamas starts to attack Israel. And then they'll put rockets in like apartment buildings, and Israel will attack those apartment buildings. And then they say they're attacking Palestinians, but really it's because Hamas has set up shop within these residential buildings. Is that is that too simplistic? But is it
No,
basically that Palestine is being held hostage by a group of Palestinians called Hamas that continue to block them from moving forward?
I absolutely love that analogy, because I think we also need to remember from a worldwide perspective that not every Palestinian is a terrorist. Not every Palestinian supports what Hamas is doing. And I think that's the innocence in this equation. And obviously, I think we all know that for basically millennia, because let's just be honest, people have been fighting over who should control Israel. And the Palestinians think it should be them. The Jews think it should be them, right? And so that's where that all comes from. But we do have to be careful about not labeling all Palestinians as terrorists, because they're not. There are truly some innocent people in this who most likely don't support Hamas and what they're doing. And those are the innocent victims in this.
Okay, the other thing that I heard yesterday, and this was from Jared Kushner, who used to be in the Trump administration. He is the one that put together the Abraham Accords, which were, the fact that he was able to do that was incredible. But he was saying that these terrorist groups within Islam, they are putting out worldwide broadcasts saying that the Al-Aqsa, oh shoot,
The flood.
no, it's
Mosque.
a mosque. Thank you. Sorry, had a momentary lapse of
No problem.
intelligence there. Okay, so this Al-Aqsa mosque is under attack by Israel, and so you have people pouring in, and they're getting very, very frustrated, because all they're hearing is what's being broadcast is our famous mosque in Israel near Jerusalem. It's under attack. It's under attack, and so they're rallying all of this crazy energy against Israel, when in reality it's completely open. The mosque is open. People can visit the mosque. So is that disinformation being put out worldwide really, really dangerous for Israel's safety?
So it is and isn't disinformation, if I could explain a little bit about that. So I think there's a couple factors that went into this. I definitely think the Abraham Accords is part of it, but I don't necessarily think the Abraham Accords are bad. I think it just freaked Iran out, right? That Israel has a normalization of relationships with countries that they don't like, right? So I think that's kind of part one. I think part two is the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, a couple years ago. I think they did vow vengeance for that. And, but I also think, so with the Al-Aqsa Mosque, what was going on there last week or about a week and a half ago? So it's a holiday for Jews called Sukkot and Simchat Torah. And then it's also a holy day as well for Muslims. And so the Al-Aqsa Mosque is on debated land. That's part of the issue. So it's holy to Jews, it's holy to Muslims. However, the mosque is obviously reserved for Muslims, which is totally fine. But basically what was happening is nationalist Jews or extreme Orthodox Jews were actually trying to come into the mosque, which they're not supposed to do. And look, I'm Jewish, so I'm trying to be as, fair as possible, but they weren't supposed to be doing that.
Yeah.
And some of the Israeli soldiers were getting a little rough in there. So like that happened. However, the problem is it took something that was small, and yes, it was a problem, but it blew it up into something that made it seem bigger than it was. So yes, there was a kernel of truth in that, obviously. But as Kushner said, it gets used as a platform to then springboard into, I guess, vengeance, if you will.
Gotcha. The media keeps saying over and over again, this is Israel's 9/11. This is like 9/11. This reminds me of 9/11. Would it be fair to say that CIA and also FBI and Homeland Security are on higher alert right now, that there could be some kind of attack on the United States? Not meaning that there will be, but that they've heightened their alert on just double checking, triple checking things to make sure that the United States isn't attacked at this time?
I mean, I would hope so. I don't mean to sound trite about that, but I mean, like from a personal perspective, I was sitting in the counterterrorism center at CIA on September 11th. So obviously I come at things from a very different perspective. And I get it. I do think it is probably the equivalent of their 9/11, just in terms of lives lost based on the scope of their population. But I think people will probably also be looking at it in the same way that sort of the 9/11 Commission investigated us, quite frankly, for what they called lapses in intelligence, and same with Israel, I think. So it's going to be looked at from those two perspectives.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, over 5 million people have illegally crossed into the United States in the last few years. We know that at least 150 of those are on the U.S. terrorist list. Do you think that there are currently sleeper cells within the United States that could be planning or scheming some kind of attack against us in the future?
So, and I don't mean to be so blunt in my answer, so hopefully this is okay.
I like bluntness.
Okay. Look, I worked the counterterrorism mission and served all over the Middle East. I don't know why we ever think that there's not a sleeper cell here. I guess it's sort of my blunt answer to that question. And I mean, yes, I agree that there are absolutely issues with our border in terms of like people coming in and out, but I think they're coming out and coming in here in other ways too. I don't think it's just the border. And I don't think there's just sleeper cells in terms of the Middle East issue. I think there's sleeper cells. We've got a lot of Russians crossing into the border from the south too.
I mean, we have a Chinese police unit set up all over the country, for heaven's sakes.
Well, that's what I worked at the FBI, was Chinese counterintelligence. And so, I'm always thinking that there's a sleeper cell here. So I don't think there's ever been a time when I didn't. I'm sorry if that's too blunt.
No, that's okay. This morning, an Israeli SEAL team, that's basically the best equivalent I could come up with, entered into Gaza, began going door to door. There was an exchange of bullets. Eventually, however, they encountered and freed 250 hostages and arrested 60 Hamas fighters. 250 is much larger than what the media has been reporting. Would it be safe to assume that perhaps Hamas has been grabbing people leading up to this, or did they maybe grab more people than we're aware of in the last week?
Well, I would be interested. So I haven't seen that reporting yet, to be completely
It just came out right before we got on. So,
oh, of course.
Yeah.
And I was doing the news before this, so I wasn't watching it. I think, well, I'd want to know who those hostages are. So we have to remember they have taken hostages at different times other than just now, right? And so I don't know is the answer to that question. But what I do know and what I find very interesting is that I was on the news this past weekend with the PR person for the IDF. And one of the things he said was so different in terms of their change of tune. I mean, look, they've exchanged one soldier for the freeing of thousands of Hamas hostages. And he said that he can't guarantee the lives of the hostages. And so that's a huge change in Israeli rhetoric, I guess, in terms of how they viewed hostages. So look, I do think that Hamas has way more than, just those, but I don't know at what times those individuals were taken hostage because they have a long history of doing that.
Yeah, yeah. And sorry to spring that. I literally like
Okay.
breaking news right before I hit go. But it's a great story. It makes me so happy that they
Me
recovered
too.
that. The one thing that I noticed was for a group of people that is so, let's use the word religious about being fully clothed, all of the hostages that they recovered were naked. Is this part of like breaking down the human spirit? Evoking shame. Why would these hostages be completely undressed when they're found?
So I can't go too much into that because I participated in some things at CIA, but I think it's just part of tactics to get people to be complicit, in torturing them and trying to, I guess, break their spirit, if you will. That's pretty common, unfortunately.
Okay, I figured it had something to do with raising the level of fear or compliance or shame or
It's
something like
more about, in all honesty, just from an interrogation point of view, it's more about gaining compliance over someone. You sort of break them down so then you can gain the upper hand, if you will.
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha. Just before we went on, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger wrote today that his entire life's work has been a mistake. He was all about globalism, world commerce versus local. He recommended Europe and the United States allowing, millions of people to flood in because it was the right thing to do. He now says that this could be a giant mistake. Any idea what he might be alluding to? I know France is saying, "Hey, we're blocking all Palestinian marches or rallies. If you don't comply, you'll be kicked out of the country." Is there just a worry that this religious fever will be more than people's ability to stay civil? Or I guess I'm trying to understand why he would openly at almost age 100 say everything I said was wrong.
It's just a profound statement. So I'm trying to,
Yeah.
I guess, digest that. I think to just, allow free borders and all of that, but then to also say no one in, no one out, both extremes on both sides are wrong. And I think that might be sort of what he's sort of alluding to is this idea of just these porous borders, letting people in and out is inherently wrong. And there needs to be some scaffolding and structure that occurs as a result of that. That's what I think he may be alluding to. And I think too, Israel-Palestine through his tenure was a huge issue. And this is probably something that he's seeing. I think he did somewhat play a role, if we think about it just in terms of how the US has responded to Israel and how we've responded or not responded to Palestine. And so I think that might be part of his issue.
Yeah. No, that's a good point because I think we're seeing this a lot right now with our own southern border, where it's in our DNA for Americans to say we love immigrants. In fact, we're a nation of immigrants. Like bring your poor, bring your suffering, and let's give us your huddled masses. But at the same time, we're like, okay, wait a minute. There's millions of people coming in. We don't know their background. We don't know if they have good intentions, bad intentions. Do they have family here? Are they bringing a different variant of COVID that South America had compared to North America? And I think just having that, like you say, lack of scaffolding or structure could be very dangerous because you just don't know who's actually coming into your country.
When I think the issue too is, and I've said this before, how do you screen for an idea? How do you do that? That's the problem, right? And so you can go and do the background checks that I know Border Patrol does, and see if they have outstanding felonies, warrants, those kinds of things are on Interpol, whatever. We can do all of that. There's databases for that, but there's not databases for ideas, and that's very hard, very cumbersome, and very expensive to screen for. And I think that's probably the core issue, but no one asks me my opinion.
Gotcha. Well, I'm glad I'm asking it. Okay. Former President George W. Bush, who rarely makes public comments, said today he's afraid for Israel and Palestine because what they're about to go through is ugly, but negotiating with cold-blooded killers is never an option. What are your thoughts on the former president's words?
So, I mean, full disclosure, I worked hand in hand with him, alongside him during 9/11, and fully supported our invasion into Iraq and offered policy decisions. So I tend to be supportive of a lot of the things that he says. I think I don't agree with negotiating with terrorists. And I think the problem has been no one has been referring to Hamas as a terrorist group. And I'm not making it up. They're on our terrorist list. And we have ways that we deal and don't deal with terrorist organizations. And he's right. We don't negotiate with terrorists. So I'm not sure what people are thinking the end game will be in terms of if we enter into negotiations with Hamas. I don't think that's a win-win situation. And unfortunately, I think it's going to end in bloodshed on both sides, which is not something I want.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm very pro-human, but I'm also very pro safety and ownership and property rights and things like that. Thank you so much for coming on. If people want to continue to follow your work or stay connected, what's the best way to do that, Tracy?
Sure. On TikTok or Instagram, my handles on both of them are at The Unexpected Spy.
The Unexpected Spy. Okay, and then you are a correspondent on national security for News Nation.
Yes, and I'm an adjunct professor of criminal justice at Texas Christian University.
Okay, great. Tracy Walder, former FBI and CIA, thank you so much for coming on our show. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.